Is pleasure enough? Take 2. A month ago, in this pulpit, I set out to preach about the purpose of it all. Those of you who were here know that I didn't make it all the way through. Some of you may have had some curiosity as to whether I would find a purpose for it all. Most of you were just glad that I got some medical attention and didn't actually suffer a heart attack. And it may be that what happened to me then was just what the doctor said it was, dehydration and a mild virus. But I wonder if there wasn't some element of karma involved, some spirit protecting the ultimate secrets of the universe and ready to strike down anyone who would dare speak about them openly. Well, I'm not Indiana Jones. And I don't think I'm opening up cult secrets here at the UU Meeting House, but you never know. We start out with the observation that bad things happen, and just now there are a lot of them in the public sphere, probably more than there were a month ago. The outrageous police shooting of an unarmed black teenager in Ferguson, Missouri, has been met with community protests, and the police have overreacted to those protests, and there had been a rioting and now a curfew. The suicide of Robin Williams hit us all hard, but who has not laughed silly at his comic genius? The situation in Iraq continues to deteriorate, and the U.S. is stepping back in gingerly with advice and humanitarian aid, while the so-called Islamic State continues to wreak havoc in Iraq and Syria. The Israeli crackdown in Gaza has resulted in a Dutch man giving back the medal he had been awarded in recognition of his family's courage in sheltering Jews during the Holocaust. An outbreak of Ebola rages in 4 countries in West Africa, killing citizens and the doctors and nurses trying to care for them. Here at the elbow of Cape Cod, these troubles can feel remote, yet we know that we are all interconnected. TV used to bring the wars into our living rooms, but now the internet brings video of almost everything that happens to our computer screen or smartphone within minutes. You can get away from the news. You can go fishing or walking or swimming or sailing, and I recommend for us all to spend some time drinking in Cape Cod's beauty. But when you come inside and flip on the screen, there it will be. Awash in problem piling up on top of problem, problems presenting themselves in new form and yet surprisingly familiar. You may agree with me that we're in a mighty pickle, and yet wonder what this has to do with the purpose of it all. I will try to make a connection. Since time immemorial, people have looked at the sorry state of the world and wondered why bad stuff happens. And most of them, for most of history, have believed that all that we see around us was created by a god or gods. So the question gets personalized as, how does God allow this sort of thing to happen? Isn't God supposed to be good and loving? Isn't God supposed to be all-powerful? Isn't God supposed to be all-knowing? Universalists in particular historically have founded their faith on confidence that God was so loving that no human could go to hell, that everyone would be saved. We express this idea of universal salvation today in our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Or in a bumper sticker that says, God loves the whole world, no exceptions. And that brave statement comes slap up against some hard realities in such a time as this. Of what value, you may well ask, is the love of an infinite being if that love does not prevent people from dying like flies before the Ebola virus? If that love allows the creation of hundreds of thousands of refugees on a mountain in Iraq? If that love did not save Michael Brown from death at the hands of the police, or Robin Williams from death at his own hand? We have no need of a divine abstraction, something we can sit back and debate like the weather or the unified field theory. This world is hurting. We are hurting. Even here in this little pseudo-paradise spit of sand cantilevered 40 miles out into the ocean from mainland Massachusetts. John Hick is a 20th century philosopher who has tried to engage with this big question of God's justice in his classic book, Evil and the God of Love. He takes pain to carefully describe the main Christian perspective on the problem of evil arising from St. Augustine, and then demonstrates why that is not adequate. Augustine basically had two arguments for how you could have an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-benevolent God and still have evil. First, God gave humans free will, and when humans freely chose to do evil, this could not be God's doing. And here's a little quote from St. Augustine. For as he is the creator of all natures, so also is he the bestower of all powers, not of all wills. For wicked wills are not from him, being contrary to nature, which is from him. Is that hair split finely enough for you? Our nature comes from God and is good, but when we do evil, we're acting contrary to our nature, and God is not responsible. Augustine's second argument is aesthetic. A painting would be dull indeed if it consisted entirely of one color. You need a variety of tones to create the beautiful picture. Life in this world would be dull indeed if everyone always did good, or if we always got pleasure. Hicks spends a good part of his book demonstrating why both the conventional free will and the conventional aesthetic defense are not adequate. And then he moves on to the solution he proposes, which stems from some suggestions of the 2nd century church father Irenaeus. And it is this which led Hick to consider God's purpose in creating the world and in creating humans. He takes the analogy between God and a human parent, an analogy used extensively by Jesus, and argues that as pleasure, the good, is not the highest value in raising children, it is not the highest value in human life. Rather, a wise and loving parent will want the child to encounter the good and the bad in order to grow to spiritual maturity. You can't eat dessert all the time. Sometimes you have to eat your spinach. For me, this idea invokes the story of Prince Siddhartha. Prince Siddhartha was brought up in a wealthy household where every want was satisfied, and his parents were very careful in what he was exposed to within the palace. No sick people, no dying people, no deformed people. But one day, Prince Siddhartha escaped the palace and discovered to his shock that the mass of humanity suffered from hunger, want, disease, and death. He was greatly disturbed by this and went out into the wilderness to live the life of an ascetic, eating and drinking the barest minimum to keep himself alive. After several years of this, though, he renounced asceticism in favor of what he called the middle way, a regime of moderate food and other pleasure. He attained his enlightenment while practicing this middle way, and we know him today as the Buddha, the enlightened one. Prince Siddhartha would not have attained enlightenment had he not been exposed to the suffering of the world. A world of pure pleasure without any pain, without any evil or suffering, might be some ideal of paradise, a state to which we could repair after death or after the last judgment, according to our own theology, but it would not be very good for growing spiritual maturity. Peter Fleck, as I mentioned, was the minister who founded and fostered the fellowship which grew into this congregation. He was personally well acquainted with evil. A Dutchman of Jewish heritage, he and his wife narrowly got out of Amsterdam ahead of the Nazis. In America, he became an investment banker and then a UU minister. And Peter wrote this wonderful essay, The Blessings of Imperfection, from which I quoted earlier. And here's another quote. One could say that the imperfection of creation is meant to challenge humankind to make creation less imperfect. And that creation has endowed humankind with the means to do just that. And so it is that imperfect men and women are engaged in the process of trying to make an imperfect world more perfect. What if the world were ever complete, says Peter Fleck? There would be nothing left to be done. The human task would be fulfilled. The human role ended. But he adds, don't worry. While we may, yes, must, strive for perfection, perfection is not attainable. It is the striving toward perfection that counts. Only the idea of something can be perfect. Its material expression, or to use a loaded word, its incarnation, cannot be perfect. Let me give you that again. Only the idea of something can be perfect. This goes back to Plato. Its material expression, or to use a loaded word, its incarnation, cannot be perfect. One of the things distinguishing universalism from Orthodox Christianity, this is me speaking now, not Peter, is that in universalism there was never a fall, never an original state of perfection, but rather we grow towards perfection. Albert Ziegler, the last universalist to articulate universalist theology, said this in 1959. The problem of evil is the fact that man does not do as he ought to do. In short, the dilemma of man's imperfection. Excuse the sexist language, we're talking 1959 here. The whole structure falls when we realize that it provides a solution for a dilemma which does not exist. Imperfection exists, but it is not a dilemma. Orthodoxy supposed a completed universe, a perfect finished creation, and so finds a problem in the existence of imperfection in it. Reason, and any healthy faith that illumines it, must know that creation is moving on, not running down. That the universe is in process. That life did not begin in perfection, but in the working out of a perfect purpose is still moving from chaos into order. What is more natural then than that there is imperfection in the universe and in humankind? The words of Albert Ziegler. A loving parent would not try to shield his or her children from the imperfections of the world, as Prince Siddhartha's father did. And John Hick argues by analogy that God does not either. The presence of suffering, disease, death, poverty, environmental degradation in the world is not a flaw. It is woven into the fabric of being. For the purpose of it all is not to give us pleasure, but to give us progress. Look at evolutionary history. The fossil record is full of animals and plants which were evolutionary dead ends, like the dodo and the dinosaur, life forms which could not adapt to changes in the environment. The fossil record also shows that there were mass extinctions at least 2 points in the history of life. If you look at it from a viewpoint of efficiency, it was a massive waste. But it has evolved creatures who can reflect self-consciously, who can write a play like Hamlet or paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Every dead end has moved the whole process forward. And I don't mean to suggest that humans are the pinnacle of evolution either. We're a way station, and the human race continues to evolve. Theologian Matthew Fox says that humans are the self-consciousness of the universe. Humans are the self-consciousness of the universe. In the world we know through science, there was no state of perfection, no Garden of Eden. Even the idea of perfection is a human creation. Nothing in nature is perfect. In fact, the term is meaningless. Everything is complete in itself, but everything is also evolving. Before there was something, there was nothing. And then the Big Bang happened, and everything that is here unfolded from that. Let me tell you the story of someone I will call Lucy. Lucy once went to see a movie starring Matt Damon and fell head over heels in love with him from watching the movie. She went right out and saw every other movie of his she could, and it got to where she would dream of him at night, and she would talk to him as she was driving her car. Lucy's marriage wasn't going so well, and she fantasized about how Matt would be the perfect mate for her. One day, she actually was in a hotel elevator in Boston, and who should walk in but Matt Damon. Yeah. Lucy started to go up to him, and her mind was racing to find something impressive to say, but all she got was, and then the doors opened, and he left. What she realized, though, in the few seconds after he left, that was the real Matt Damon. He was a lot shorter than she was. He smelled of garlic and had one arm shorter than the other. In other words, the perfection which she had worshipped from afar came undone when she got close to the real Matt Damon. Perfection on the silver screen, of course, is achieved through camera angles and manipulation of the images. How many of us have stories like Lucy's? I don't know about you, but I felt like a piece of my heart had been torn out when I read about Robin Williams' suicide. I hadn't known how connected I felt to him until that moment. The connection which I shared, of course, with millions of other fans was to the person we thought we knew. The incredibly agile comic mind which could riff on nothing for half an hour and keep an audience in stitches. Who could start a sentence in a fake Bulgarian accent and finish it in a fake Korean one. Behind all this brilliance, we've all discovered this week, was a human being who carried a burden of severe depression and substance abuse. And apparently, he was recently diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The comic perfection which entranced us from a distance displays his all too human flaws as we come closer. We cannot know what was in his mind, but it may be that he was himself such a believer in his own perfection, which depended on extraordinary physical and mental agility, that he was unable to face the fact that Parkinson's would soon slow him down. If that is the case, I wish I could have introduced him to my father. My father was a brilliant lawyer who suffered a disabling stroke at age 50 when I was in high school. He had to give up his law career, but he worked hard at his physical rehabilitation, and he reinvented himself as sort of a lay minister and spent many days visiting the sick and homebound. He was in many ways a kinder, gentler man after his stroke than before. But there was an additional cost. He developed a bipolar mental illness, and this made him a burden to the family, particularly to my mother, and he knew it. It is a characteristic of this kind of illness that one exaggerates one's negative impact on others. And when I was in my late 20s, Dad acted on his feelings by taking his own life. It is hard to live on half a loaf when you're used to having all the bread you want. My father did adjust to his disabilities for 10 years, but ultimately he needed to get out, just as Robin Williams did. The point is not whether we approve or defend a person's decision to take his or her own life, and in what circumstances. The point here is that life is not about perfection. And it offers itself to you even when your circumstances may be reduced. Spiritual maturity consists in meeting life where it meets you. The point of life is not to offer us an easy road to obtaining every kind of pleasure. And in saying that, I'm not glorifying suffering or pain. I reject that part of the Christian tradition which holds up suffering as noble. Suffering is not noble, but it is inevitable. And life is about the whole shooting match. There's not something wrong with life because there is pain, suffering, disease, death, and injustice in it. These are part of its warp and weft. And yet we are called as people of faith to do what we can to heal, to right the wrong, to bind up the wounds, to release the captive, to witness and to fight for love and justice. We find ourselves in helping others cope with the imperfections of life. Robin Williams recognized this, and in an extraordinary interview he gave to Diane Sawyer in 2006, which has also been posted on social media, after it became publicly known that he had been battling addictions. So I'll close with a reading from that. Diane says, "Was there one moment when you fell into it again? Was there one day?" "It's very gradual," said Robin. "You're standing at a precipice and you look down. There's a voice. It's a little quiet voice that goes, jump. The same voice that says, just one. There's a voice that goes, jump. And the idea, just one. And for someone who has no tolerance for it, that's not a possibility." Diane says, "To talk about it as caused by something," Robin cuts her off. "It's not caused by anything. It's just there. It's just, latent. Wait. It lays in wait for the time when you think, it's fine now, I'm okay. And the next thing you know, bloop, it's not okay. This is not going so well." Diane says, "Is there sadness about these past 2 years then?" Robin says, "Yes, there's a sadness. And then you have to go, and there's also hope. I mean, there's a sadness like you wish they hadn't happened, but they did. And the purpose is to make you different. This is what they call a Buddhist gift. I would call it the ultimate Christian gift. It's that idea of you're back, and you realize that the thing that matters are others. The thing that matters are others, way beyond yourself. Self goes away. Ego, bye-bye. You realize that there are a lot of amazing people out there to be grateful for. And a loving God. And other than that, good luck." That was the end of the interview. Other than that, a loving God can and does allow a world in which there are values besides pleasure, where life presents us with challenges which bring out the best in us. Everything is interfolded. In the comic is the cosmic. In the end is the beginning. In the destructive is the progressive. In the evil is the good. Amen.